Hello, everybody, and welcome to Contextual Christianity. My name is Daniel Donahue, and I'm certainly glad you're here. Today's episode, we're going to be addressing something that some would consider completely outside of the scope and realm of Christianity. That some would say is not even a theological question, but more a scientific question, and therefore should be kept to the scientists and avoided by theologians. And I'll admit I'm not a scientist. I don't have a scientific degree. But it doesn't mean I can not read peer-reviewed papers or do decent research. And it doesn't mean that scientists have all the answers or are a monolithic group in terms of their understanding of the world around them. So I believe it's perfectly rational and fine to bring up scientific questions, specifically scientific questions that deal with our hermeneutics, how we interpret the Bible. If I'm going to base an interpretation on a certain 11 chapters in the book of Genesis, based upon how I see the observational world around me, well, then that's a hermeneutical question and therefore a theological question. So what exactly is this question? Well, it really has to go with how old the earth is. Not specifically, but it does touch on that. I'm going to be mainly addressing, when did dinosaurs die off? And did dinosaurs live side by side with humans? There's two models. Generally speaking, there's usually a religious model on the cosmos and the creation, or the in cosmology, and then there's a secular scientific model called evolution and the Big Bang that precedes evolution. Obviously, evolution is primarily speaking to organic life matter, but it's attached to a larger scientific, non-theistic, naturalistic way of interpreting the world. Basically, God was not involved. Therefore, I would say it's actually a religious question. So, in one sense, it's two religious cosmologies. One is that God had a direct influence on it, and one where God doesn't exist, most likely, depending on who you talk to. That's a religious question. As soon as you're asking fundamental truths about the universe, and as soon as you have a system where you can interpret and have morals and framework of the soul, and you have views on all these different things, you're actually asking a moral question. Therefore, I think it's very much in the realm of Christianity and the overarching context of Christianity. So, when did dinosaurs live? Now, I will admit I'm a young Earth creationist. Doesn't necessarily mean I believe the Earth was created 6,000 years ago. I actually think it's older than that. I wouldn't be surprised that it's 15 or 20,000 years old. However, I'm realistically going to say that most likely the Earth was less than 10,000. So that's where I would place it. And therefore, when it comes to dinosaurs, the extinction has to be less than 10,000. I would say most dinosaurs died off. The final expiration dates on dinosaurs might have been less than 1,000 years ago. Now let's get into it. But I'm going to use science to hopefully get to this answer. While a evolutionist is going to most likely say that dinosaurs died off. Its final extinction was around 60 million years ago and lived up to 200 plus million years ago. And different species died off within that realm. So, where does the evidence point to? These are radically different models. And I would say they're radically different scientific models, because both are using the observational world around them to gather their thoughts. If I truly thought that the dinosaurs died off 60 million years ago, then of course I'm going to probably take the first 11 chapters of Genesis as allegorical, or at least a large scope of those chapters as allegorical. Because I believe that all truths are God's truth, scientific truths, and all of them as well. However, when I look at the world around us, I don't actually see that dinosaurs died off that long ago. And I think that the evidence actually points to the fact that dinosaurs died off closer to us and that humans were contemporary with them. So I'm only going to touch on a few of these points. And I'm in the future going to be bringing in scholars in these scientific fields. I have a couple scientists, paleontologists, those that study cells and soft tissue to verify some of this information. But let's get into some of the reasons why I personally think that the evidence is on the creationist side and is eventually going to put pie in the face to those that are holding to the evolutionary model. I'm going to start with this. This right here. This is part of a fossil. It's part of this fossil right here. And I mean this, both these come from this fossil right here. And this is only a part of a larger bone. This right here is a Triceratops femur, or part of it. The other part is out of screen over there, and there's too many little fragmented parts to go with it. Now, I bring that up for a reason. I'm going to be using this as a model later for you to understand something. That is a dinosaur bone. Or at least it is a bone that has been mineralized and is now, well, rock. And when we look at this bone, we often are going to make some assumptions on when it lived. We're going to look at the rock layer. We're going to look at, let's say, carbon dating it. And we're going to look at other things. Generally, though, when paleontologists are gauging when a dinosaur died off, it's based upon the rock layer it is found in. However, that is a terrible model to actually base when these animals used to live for several reasons. For one, it actually goes against other scientific models or scientific interpretations. One of those is carbon dating. See, carbon-14 is a radiometric way of dating, objects, particular objects that were found in the past. We can identify different archaeological finds, and we can generally come up with when it was there based upon the decay rate of carbon-14, because carbon-14 has a very predictable decay rate. It has a half-life of 5,730 years, or roughly thereof. And so, which means that half of the carbon-14 that was in an object when it died off is gone in about 5,730 years. Now, the problem is that carbon dating can't actually stretch out into the millions. It doesn't go that far. If I'm not mistaken, it gets us about 700 and so on thousand years. Problem is, when we examine these bones, we find carbon in it. And carbon that doesn't give it a date of millions of years, but sometimes just tens of thousands of years. That is something that scientists are not necessarily working with. Why is it giving us such a different date? Now, as a young Earth creationist, I can recognize that tens of thousands of years is older than my scientific model. But I have other reasons on why, other scientific reasons where I can work around why it's maybe 10 or 15, 20, 30,000 years older than I believe it really is. But 30,000 years old versus 60 million years, I'm within a few thousand years. They're wildly off. That does not line up with the sciences. But that's not even the best argument. One of the better arguments, it has to do with this as well. So if I take this bone again, if you look at it, the center of this has not fully mineralized. If you see that right here, this is rock, this is actually the bone. And this bone, this fossilized bone of the Triceratops femur, is falling apart. And that's why I only have a part of it, the big part. It is slowly falling apart. And it will continue because it did not fully mineralize. That says something. How are you keeping a bone that is not fully mineralized for 60 million years? It should have turned to dust, yet we still have it. But that's not it. It's when we examine the bone inside these fossils that we start finding something else very interesting. We start finding that inside these bones is soft tissue. And we have a copious amount of different specimens of dinosaurs and that have soft tissue in it. In fact, in a few weeks, I'm most likely going to be interviewing a paleontologist or a scientist that actually studies dinosaur soft tissue cells by the name of Mark Armitage. And I would say is kind of stirring the pot in this community because his information is flying in the face of the scientific community and basically pointing to the fact that there's no possible way for dinosaurs to be have a date of 60 million years ago because of the soft tissue that is in it. The thing is, soft tissue doesn't live roughly more than 10,000 years. It doesn't. It all disappears. It all dies off. Yet we have a lot of soft tissue. And hopefully when I talk to Mark Armitage, we're going to be going over the types of soft tissue. The fact that we have nerves, the fact that we have blood cells and hemoglobin, and some of this soft tissue so well, it's almost as if these animals died a few generations ago, a few hundred years ago. And so this is very important. And his work is showing that there's no possible way that these dinosaurs died off that many years ago. So what does that say to us? Well, when we look at the information at hand, we can do one of two things. Well, we can look at the science. We can, we have our internal model, which mine is I'm a young earth creationist. And then there are those that are evolutionists. And they're going to try to interpret the observational world around them based upon their model. That's how it works. Someone has one model and they try to see the world around that. And another worldview has a different model. If science starts to confront our model, it's to the point where we're having to rethink the sciences because we do not want to let go of our model. Well, we're acting the same way as those that Galileo was confronting. Those that were holding to a geocentric world. The thing is, prior to Copernicus, there was a worldview that held that the Earth was the center of the universe, or the center of the solar system, and that all the stars and the moons and the sun all revolved around Earth. And they had these, and as they observed the night sky, they realized all these weird things and anomalies that would take place, and they created these extremely complex models for the heavens because they had their core model that they were refusing to let go of. And because they were not willing to let go of a model that didn't work, they had to make these objects in the heavens do funny things that are not scientific. And that's when Galileo basically said, hey, this is not working. Well, evolutionists are doing the same thing. Their evolutionists are the geocentric religious folk of our time period. They're holding back the scientific world because they're refusing to recognize the implications of Mark Armitage and others' works in paleontologists, in the cells, and in the fact that we have this soft tissue that should not be around. So let's say we have one specimen that's for some preservative means. Let's say iron got into it, which I'm going to be talking to Mark Armitage on, because that was a proposed view that a certain iron can basically preserve soft tissue. And someone did an experiment, and it lasted for a few years, and they said, well done, we're done. Well, maybe it can preserve in the lab, in a lab for X amount of years, maybe 10,000 years, maybe 20,000 years, 50,000 years, 500,000 years. But to say make a jump from 500,000 to 60 million is an absurdity. Soft tissue doesn't last that long. It doesn't. So that's something to consider. So what scientific model are we going to hold to? Are we going to hold to one that has to retool science the same way geocentrics had to retool the world, ever making it more complex? Or are we going to just look at, oh, wait, yeah, dinosaurs lived earlier. Yeah, that actually lines up with my scientific model of a younger Earth. And that's the thing. Once again, if I thought the Earth was 60 million years old based on the sciences, I would go with it. But I don't think that it does. And I think dinosaurs is on a long laundry list of reasons why the Earth could not possibly be that old. There's so many of these. I mean, take comets. They have to create these Oort clouds, these scientific proposals on when the Earth, when these Oort clouds that kicked out comets, because comets have an expiration date of around 10,000 years as well. Where do they come from? Where do comets come from? Because they obviously lose their tail over time. Oh, where are these comet generating clouds in the sky that we've never seen before, but we're going to propose based on some mathematical proposition. Well, that's great. Show me it. Your Oort cloud is the Bigfoot of the scientific community. It doesn't, just because you can do the math, I can do the math and basically say that there's a possibility of a different species that looks similar to humans called a Bigfoot, but it doesn't mean it's true. Just because, you have a working model or some kind of model for it doesn't mean it's true. I'm a show me the facts guy. Don't give me a unicorn of the universe. Give me the bedrock fact. All I know is comets don't last that long, and yet you created a proposal, once again, to guard your model rather than look at the facts at hand. So someone might ask then, okay, how did dinosaurs die off then? Well, thank you for asking. As a young Earth creationist, it's very easy. Prior to the flood, there was a certain environment that was around, and that environment was very conducive and environmentally and friendly for large reptilian creatures to live. However, after the flood, the environment was dramatically different, and the dinosaur populations were reduced down to one couple. Maybe they bred for a while, but over time, specifically when the Ice Age came about, a lot of those things would have been quickly driven to extinction based upon not being able to survive the elements, or because they're hostile creatures, and therefore humans would have tried to kill them off because they're dangerous, or because they're hungry. Same way that the mammoths and the woolly rhinoceroses died. They were driven to extinction. Now we have mammoths in frozen caps because they lived in that area, but the reptilian creatures did not. And so they would have went to more tropical parts of the world, and where humans would have been at. And therefore we don't have the bones to the certain extent because, well, they rot away at a different rate than those that are bones and soft tissue at a different rate than those that are frozen. So that's one of the beliefs that I hold to. And I think that makes more sense on why we have all this soft tissue in these dinosaur bones. And I mean, it's not a little bit of soft tissue. It's quite a lot. It's enough that we're able to analyze. Let me put it another way. Let's say we have this bone. I don't don't think that this has soft tissue in it. I don't know. I'm not a scientist in this realm. But let's say this has soft tissue. And this was not a dinosaur. This was a human. And I know the name of the person. Let's say it's Jane. So Jane is a murder victim, and we know it's her because of some reason. We just know it's her. And we're trying to find out how she died. Well, one method a particular forensic scientist could use is examining the soft tissue in the bone. If we examine the soft tissue, we could find out something about it. Because if we were to examine the most, if not all, dinosaur bones and their soft tissue, we actually can know basically the murder of all these animals, or the extinction, what drove most of them to death. In the same way, we can find out how Jane died, if it was true for this. Because what Armitage has discovered, Dr. Armitage, is that inside these dinosaur fossils, in the soft tissue, is systemic blood clotting. That's an important detail to realize. Systemic blood clotting. Blood clotting, one of the number one. So once again, let's say this is Jane. Jane, the soft tissue in her bone, has systemic blood clotting. Well, what are we going to know about this systemic blood clotting? Well, that she most likely died of asphyxiation, either by being strangled to death or by drowning by water. Systemic blood clotting is one of the number one things you're going to find in a drowned victim. I can learn a lot about Jane Doe. The same way, the dinosaur bones are crying out and telling us exactly how they died. Now, I'm no expert on dinosaurs. However, I know enough that if the majority of these dinosaur soft tissue samples are coming back with systemic blood clotting, the number one sign of blood clotting is drowning or asphyxiation per se. I'm not an expert on like T-Rexes or Triceratops, but I think it would be rather hard to strangle a dinosaur to death. And yet which points to the number one way that most of these dinosaurs died, the fossilized ones, was out of a flood. It was from a flood. Makes sense. Further lining up with my scientific model, which is that the Earth was destroyed or went through a global catastrophe of a flood. Now, someone might push back and say, well, there were localized floods. Well, I was talking to another one of my paleontologist friends who's been doing some research in dinosaur beds, dinosaur fossil beds, and something that he was talking to me about. Mind you, I don't have all the details on this, so I apologize. But I'm going to be interviewing him as well. He was saying this one species of dinosaurs, roughly 9,000 of them, all died in a similar drowning event. A drowning event. Flood. But it was a localized flood. The problem, and they were all kind of buried in this certain rock layer, and that all these dinosaurs were pushed up against this giant boulder, and we have all of them kind of smashed up against that. Problem with the idea of that being a localized flood is the fact that the strata of rock, the rock formation that they're in, the part of the rock that scientists basically gauge the age of the Earth on, is the size of North America and is part of Europe as well. So as he was trying to indicate to me, so what you're saying is that a flood that we have a rock layer for that is continental, at minimum a continental flood, which no evolutionist that I've heard ever believes in. Minimum continental flood happened that killed off these dinosaurs. Well, that would explain, well, I know of a minimum continental flood, which was a global flood that would have done that and explains the mineralizations. I mean, if there's a lot of soot and bedrock, or a certain different degree, the different minerals mixed in with these, a lot of mud mixed in with this dinosaur layer, it would make sense that all these bones were fossilized. Because when you encapsulate, because we've got fossilization takes place very rapidly. There's indications that fossilization can happen extremely fast. And it usually happens when something is completely encapsulated with water. All these dinosaurs died of asphyxiation. The fossil beds point to the fact that they died of a flood, and this flood is rather large. Which scientific model am I going to hold to? Am I going to hold to one that goes against carbon dating? Am I going to go against the one that is just has an absurd date for soft tissue? Am I going to go to one that basically says a local flood, which was a continental size local flood, multiple continental one? Or am I going to go to a scientific model that basically lines up perfectly? See, this is why this is important for Christians to understand. I was giving this same conversation plus other facts, which I'm going to get into later, which is basically carved images of dinosaurs to youth, and they're like, oh, this makes so much more sense. It's like the light bulbs are going off. Now, an interesting thing when it comes to Dr. Mark Armitage, which he'll talk to, is similar thing that, and he may not say this, but similar thing happened to him that happened to Galileo. Negative consequences for developing or making scientific discoveries. Evolution is the golden goose to the secular scientific community, just like the geocentric was to those at the time of Galileo. And because he's basically poking at the beast in a very sore spot, they don't like it. Well, he has, in a lot of senses, been marginalized in the scientific community and was let go in a very dubious and negative ways that I'm hoping he's going to explain further. But the thing is, truth has consequences. And as believers, and as those that hold to the factual elements of the world around us, let's not let our empty and vain traditions hinder us from coming to the true reality of the world around us. Because when we do that, one of the things it's going to do is it's going to prevent us from having a truly scientific, objective view of the world. Now, even if dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, it's not going to necessarily destroy my faith. It's not. I might have to put on an allegorical view of Genesis 1 through 11. But based upon the observed world around us, I don't think we have to. I can read Genesis, understand how it is meant to be interpreted. I can apply that. I look at the world around us, the known world around us. Does it line up with the known world around us? Oh, it does? Oh, and then from there, I'm able to plug in the facts and see that it corresponds. That's what we should do. That's what science is about. We're not meant to hold on to dead models. That's how new discoveries are found. So with all of that, I hope you found this interesting. Once again, my name is Daniel Donahue. This is Contextual Christianity. Have a fantastic rest of your day.